Well, thanks very much, Sarah. As I think most people on the call know, Sarah is my state director in New Hampshire. And I think we also have on the call from my staff, Chris Scott, Madison Lightfoot, Erica Anhalt, and Kate Hill. We're all on to be able to answer questions that you might have as the result of our conversation. Let me begin by thanking each of you for being willing to join me on this call this afternoon. And most important, thank you for everything that you're doing to ensure that the students of New Hampshire are getting the education that we all want for them. I know this is a really challenging time, challenging for families throughout the state, for business people, for school officials, and especially for teachers. I can tell you that I've talked to a number of people who have acknowledged how much tougher the teaching profession is than they realized after having their children home and trying to help them with remote learning. So hopefully people are getting an even greater appreciation for the work that each of you do. I really wanted to talk with you because, as you know, we've been working in Washington to try and provide help for people as they're going through this really difficult and, I think, anxiety-producing time. A lot of people have lost their jobs, as we know. For kids, that means that in a lot of families, there's a lot of stress. For those kids who are in families that have had issues with domestic violence, that has increased during this period. And also, we know that all of the challenges for kids at risk have been exacerbated by what's going on right now. And for all students, it has meant a time of increased anxiety and uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next. So I appreciate that you all have been on the front lines of dealing with those challenges, and I want to know what more we can do in Washington to try and support you in this effort. As I'm sure you're aware, the CARES bill that was passed back in March included funding for education. Now, it's my understanding that we haven't yet seen those dollars in New Hampshire. There is an additional fund in the House-passed bill that would provide a $90 billion state fiscal stabilization fund at the Department of Education, which would be distributed to states based on population and the number of children, low-income children. That is significantly more than was in the CARES Act, and I hope it gives us a place to negotiate so we can hopefully get some bipartisan support for that in the Senate as well and get it passed out. I've heard a number of other concerns that people have had around infrastructure challenges, around staffing as we think about next year and dealing with some of the interventions that we need to address children who have fallen behind, to address mental health issues, the need for counseling. So I appreciate that there are a whole range of support efforts that all of you need in the classroom, and I'm really interested in hearing from each of you what you would like to see us do and what you think would be most helpful. I'm going to stop there so that there is more time for you all to comment, since we have additional votes this afternoon in the Senate, and so I'm going to have to get off the call at a time certain, and this will give me a chance to hear from each of you. Thank you very much. Great. And Sarah, should I turn it over to you?
Yep. Thanks, everyone. As Senator Shaheen mentioned, we do have a hard stop here at 3:45, so I'm going to start with Doug. Take it away, Doug. Don't forget to take yourself off mute.
Yep, just did. Thank you. And Senator Shaheen, this is Doug Lay, AFT, New Hampshire. Thank you for putting this call together, and certainly thank you for all the work that you have done and continue to do in Washington on our behalf. I certainly want to urge you to continue to work hard on procuring funding for New Hampshire, whether it be the funding for education, funding for backfilling state budgets, any of that. I mean, I know there's a lot of support here in the state for that. There's a lot of concern on the part of a lot of people that I talk to about what we're going to be doing in the fall when it comes to reopening the schools. And I also know from conversations that I've been in, whether in the public sector or in the private sector in higher ed, of all the difficulties and challenges we're going to be facing to try and get back into the classroom. And it's going to be costly, and it's going to be difficult, but hopefully we can have the support in order to do that. And I know the public wants to have that as much as possible. I do want to just mention a few specific things, and these are really more focused on some things I've heard from paraeducators, paraprofessionals, who I work with as well. And I just wanted to make sure that some of their concerns were made clear to you in terms of experience and some of the things that have been happening for them. One is just simply technology. Not all paraeducators really been provided the technology they should be provided by their districts. I think this is a broad-based problem, the reliance on technology people already own, and we can't continue doing that. We're going to have to figure out ways to get technology. If we're going to be doing a lot of remote learning, which I suspect we will, we've really got to get the technology and the training into people's hands. We can't rely upon them to use their own continuing. There's also been questions raised about the privacy rights of the students and also issues of confidentiality and the right to privacy. These are all very important for these paraeducators when working with students. But when they're working with them online and in their homes, I mean, there are real sort of lines that they're really coming up to, if not crossing, and not deliberately doing, but whether it be the ethics code of conduct and things like that. So I think we need some clarifications and work done on that. I think also, again, another issue that I've heard a multitude of times is a lot of times the paraeducators are just left on their own to go work with the students, and yet paraeducators are supposed to be working under the direct supervision of a certified professional, usually the teacher, but on an online setting, that just does not happen. It is not taking place on a regular basis, and people don't want to get in trouble on that, but it is regulated. You know, that's based on both U.S. and state legislation, and we need to make sure that people aren't, or districts aren't, crossing the line there. And then I think the only other things I would mention here, and I have to run myself, so I appreciate being able to go first, is just questions raised. Are services being billed under Medicaid? Who's doing that? We don't even know in some cases who is doing this and doing the billing under Medicaid, and that's going to be a crucial thing for districts going forward, because so many of our districts rely very much upon the Medicaid billing. And so we want to make sure that that's happening and it's being done appropriately. And if it has to change, how is that going to change going forward in the future if we're in a remote setting or in a hybrid setting? So again, I want to really thank you for all the work that you have done and continue to do. And these were just some of the things that I sort of thought of to sort of represent that group, because I know there are plenty of teachers on here today who can handle the teacher end of things. So thank you, and I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Doug. I know you have to go, but can I ask you quickly, do you have any idea how widespread the issue around paraprofessionals who have not been appropriately supervised is? Is there any way to quantify that and to know how widespread that is?
I don't know offhand, and I don't know how we could, we would probably have to talk to our locals. I'm sure Megan could do so as well on the NEA side. I think it just varies district by district, I think. And a lot of it is, I think I understand that, given the urgency we found ourselves in, it's understandable that, with all the pressures and things, things happen. But now we're starting to look towards fall, and we have to make sure that this is done properly going forward in the fall. We can be forgiven, I think, for errors or not quite doing things the way they perhaps normally would be done given the emergency. But going forward, we need to make sure we're doing it right, and make sure that they're being supervised and that there's the proper relationship between the teacher and the paraeducator.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that, and thank you for taking time to be on the call.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Megan Tuttle.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you, Senator, for putting this call together. It's so important that everyone is continuing the conversation about, what's happening in the schools. I will echo everything that Doug just said. I can definitely put a survey out to my members, my ESP members, if you want, to find out what's been going on with supervision. And then, we can get back to your office if you'd like us to do that.
That might be really helpful. There may be other things that we also want to find out about. So let's maybe after the end of the call, we could check back in with you and see what might be possible. I think the other question is this something that should be addressed as part of federal legislation? Is it something you're looking at the state level, at your local district level? So Doug suggested that it might be an issue at both the federal and state level, but
review step by step the next day's schedule. But in the morning,
we can do whatever we need to do for that.
Great.
A few other things to talk about real quick, and I'm going to let all the educators on the call talk more specific in their classrooms, but one thing, so I have a call tonight. We call them Tuttle Talks on Tuesday nights for NEA New Hampshire members, and I have about 250 plus people signed up for it, and I put out a question this morning on things they're looking at for reopening the schools, and the biggest concern that the educators are having so far is safety and testing. Are they going to have to be tested when they go back if we go back? What's that going to look like? Who's going to pay for it? Are they going to have the PPE provided for them? Are they going to have to be wearing masks when they go back? And will the kids have to be wearing masks? And how are we going to social distance? And all those types of things seem to be, a really big concern, as well as the hybrid system that people keep talking about. And the concern there is really, we're looking at other states to see what's going to happen, but what about educator burnout if we're doing a hybrid system? Because are the teachers or the educators, the paras, everybody in the schools just going to be expected to, okay, we're educators and we're going to do this for the kids, but what about their own families that they're taking care of? And with the safety, being immune compromised and going back to, back to their homes where other people might be immune compromised. And just
when you say, I'm sorry to interrupt, Megan, but when you say hybrid system, can you explain what you mean exactly when people are concerned about the hybrid system?
Yeah, so it would be a mix of remote instruction and in-school instruction and learning. So kids might go to school 2 days a week, and then another group might go the other 2 days, and then it might be one whole day of remote instruction at home. Who would be doing those two different classes? Who would be doing remote? Who would be doing the in-person? Because we want to keep the kids 6 feet apart. Obviously, we can't do that with our class sizes. So they would kind of take turns going into the buildings. But what would happen on the days that they're not in the buildings? They would probably be doing the remote instruction, but who would be teaching that? We already have a teacher shortage as it is, that sort of thing. And even if they went to, days and nights, who would be doing that? There's just a lot of concern because the educators in New Hampshire have been amazing on, the situation arose and they grabbed it, they went with it, and they've been doing such an amazing job this year. But I've heard a lot of the work balance and home balance has been really hard for a lot of them. So kind of, would it be a hybrid or, what we would do with that? And then the other thing,
well, I was just going to echo what you just said, that I've heard those same kinds of concerns from people that between trying to manage the teaching schedule at the same time, people may have children at home themselves and dealing with their own families. It's been very challenging.
Yeah, and they're doing a great job, but it's been kind of hard.
Yes, for sure.
It's a federal job. If we can get Betsy DeVos to do anything about special ed, that would be amazing. I'm hearing a lot from the special ed teachers just about deadlines and things like that, and it's just so hard to do some of this over remote learning, going back also to the privacy issues that Doug was talking about. I don't know the answer. I don't have a solution. I just know that it's been a really big problem. And also the last thing I'll bring up and then let others chat is about the technology challenges, just in terms of educators using their own devices and the privacy concerns, but also with bandwidth and connectivity because there's internet, but, when you have 4 people on internet at home, it gets a little slow and things don't always work the way they should be. So, federally, any money to get devices for the kids or to get devices for the educators, so we're not using our own, and then to kind of beef up the bandwidth and the connectivity. I think all of those, and like I said, I have about 250 plus members that I'm going to be talking to tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to have some more questions, comments, concerns, but I can also get some more information if you need it.
Sure. Well, I think sharing with us what you hear from them would be very helpful. There are several pieces of legislation, and as you may know, there was money in the CARES bill to try and help with some of those short-term technology needs. I'm on a piece of legislation that would provide $4 billion to help with dealing with hotspots and Wi-Fi, providing technology, hardware, and software for school districts. It deals with some of the short-term needs. It doesn't deal with the long-term. How are we going to ensure that there is high-speed internet to every house in New Hampshire and in this country? And I think ultimately that's a decision we've got to make at the federal level so that there is equal access to the internet and the opportunities that it provides for all of our young people.
Exactly. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing on this.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Jen Weaver?
Hi, yes. So I'm Jennifer Weaver. I am the president of the Franklin Education Association. I'd just like to say, though, thank you so much, Shaheen, for giving us as teachers and people who work with teachers this opportunity to paint the picture of my chaotic house. This began with me traveling to Syracuse University to pick up my oldest child, what I thought was going to be for a very short time. He's still here. And then I very quickly moved Bishop Brady High School into another room of my house to learn while I was down here in my family room teaching. And to make it even more chaotic, my husband was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood and quickly changed to remote learning himself as a warrant officer too. So my world definitely turned upside down,
wow,
to say the least. But through it all, we are a family and we got through it. We're still getting through it as I'm still teaching today. A concern I had from the beginning, and this has been touched upon already, is the use of our personal internet and cell phones. I did put together an MOU to my district not long ago, 2 weeks ago actually, that I went to try and negotiate it. I left feeling very broken down and made to feel like I was being greedy, asking for help to help cover the costs, to defer some of the costs that we are seeing on our internet. Many teachers did have to increase their bandwidth to just support what they were trying to do at home. So this was a huge concern of mine. Teachers using their personal cell phones or home phones to make calls home. Very quickly, all of our families got our personal phone numbers, and were calling us at all hours of the day and night. Yes, I'm here for them. I mean, I live in my community that I teach in. Everybody knows where I live. It's Mrs. Weaver's house. So, I get that, but there has to be a time when we can shut it off, and we are just, for me, mom. I think that's important for all of us. I am in a school district where we're very fortunate to have a 1-to-1 Chromebook for kids for grades 1 through 12. The problem we very quickly face is that our IT department would not allow these Chromebooks to go live feed. What I teach had to be done. So they couldn't.
What do you mean by that?
Their Chromebooks would not. They couldn't open up their to be able to have the screen so that you can have video. They turned it off on all these Chromebooks. So in order for me to teach, that has to be on. I teach reading intervention. I have to be able to share the book with them because, thank goodness, the program right here out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Fontes and Pinal, very quickly went live feed. So I can access their books, which that's amazing how quickly they got that for us. But in order to do it, I need to see the students. They need to see my mouth. It had to be done live feed. So our district did put out, and I am concerned about this, is that the children had to use a personal device. Now, as I said when I started, I have a child that goes to Bishop Brady High School. I know when I sign my checks that I am signing off for a private school. I get that. But these children that I'm instructing are in a public education. They are entitled to a free public education. And as I said, I'm in Franklin. It is a poor district. There are many families that cannot afford it. Yes, surveys went out, but the amount that came back, there's too many that are left with nothing. And I can tell because my normal caseload with my colleague is 100 students per day that we see, and we are at about 30. So that leaves us 70 students that right now we are not servicing. And these are already students that are below grade level. They need extra support in reading and aren't receiving it. So I'm very concerned over what that's going to mean for the coming school year. Other concerns my colleagues have is the lack of some students participating and still being moved to the next grade. What will be the domino effects? What supports will we need to have in place for the following school year for these students? Social interactions. Students are not socially interacting, which right now is a good thing, but it also creates other dilemmas. Students need that social interaction to understand how to do it. That is a learning curve, especially in our district. Our teacher also reached out to me, and during this time, the students don't have access to the amount of materials that they would normally have. Yes, there were supplies that were put out at our SAU to help with some of these things, but they were crayons and markers and things like that, and construction paper. It wasn't what our art department would normally use. In wealthier school districts, the parents would be able to supply that and give those to our children. I just feel that, there are so many children here that have had to do without. And that's another huge concern. We know that art is really helps with fine motor skills, and where will this take us? What will be, more ramifications and snowballing down the road? Positive note, we had a wonderful parade, as so many districts have had. And with that, I live near the school, so I opened up my trunk to my Jeep, and I said, fill Jen's Jeep. And I was just amazed at all my colleagues who really supported this drive. And we gave, on behalf of our local association, to our local food bank, and the smiles on their face was just amazing. Moving forward, I'm really worried about this pandemic. We'll take it 1 week at a time, but hoping and to prepare for what's going up next. I really think the state level or the federal level down needs to encourage it in districts to develop a pandemic team. And these pandemic teams need to include all stakeholders, not just administration. They're not looking at the larger picture, but they need to also look at, calling in the teachers, calling in the assistants like the first woman talked about, calling in the parents. The parents have been right there with their children. And it's been amazing to watch my children in education, because I haven't done that in years, as I have no clue what they're really doing. Aerospace engineer is not my forte. I normally leave it to Syracuse. Another piece
Jen,
to look at,
do you have just one more quick point you want to make? I just want to make sure we're able to get to everyone else on the list.
The last piece I have is looking at that teachers going forward next year will be on the front line. What do we have in place to protect these teachers and making sure that they are safe? And if they don't feel comfortable going back to school because they're at a high risk, what safety measures will we have in place for them?
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. You raised a number of really critical points that need to be answered.
Good, thank you. Did we have Adam Marcoux join?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. You're up.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Senator, thank you for taking
Adam.
the time to hear from us during this pandemic crisis that we're dealing with. My colleagues before me have said basically everything that I had written down on my notepad to talk about, from the internet and phone issues. Nashua has a high number of free and reduced lunch students, so we have a significant Title I budget and significant need for those children. And one of the things that one of the teachers in my district said, I'm the president of our local. I'm fortunate to have full-time release in my job doing that, so I see things differently than my teacher colleagues do. But someone sent me an email and asked me if we were grading privilege this trimester. And I really stopped and had to think about what that meant, because we've had some back and forth with our school board about how we're grading our students. And the lady from Franklin just mentioned how we're going to deal with the gaps in education, and are we just moving all these kids forward, and what repercussions we'll have on that. And ultimately, we're grading most of our students in Nashua, and is that a fair thing to do when we have kids that parents can afford all the technology and the internet and the Wi-Fi and whatever they need, and then we have children that have nothing, where they rely on school for breakfast and lunch and clothes and shoes and everything else. We were able to distribute Chromebooks to kids, and Comcast was great about opening up all the hotspots here in Nashua for free at this time. But that's not going to last forever. Comcast is still a for-profit company, and what are we going to do when this continues? Because I don't really see this going away. How are we giving our free education that's appropriate for all to those students? And I don't have an answer for that. We have call logs and email logs, and we are using our school resource officers and truant officers to help make connections with these families to make sure they have what they need in a non-threatening way. We have a high ELL population in our city. They're having a major difficulty accessing the curriculum and the technology because of the language barriers.
Yep.
And my colleagues would, take me out back and beat me if I didn't mention special ed, which has been mentioned already. My district and we co-wrote a letter that was sent to our New Hampshire Department of Education begging, pleading for help with special ed. Their jobs are challenging in a normal setting with the increased paperwork that has been sent out through the federal level, and with teaching and case managing and IEP meetings and the paperwork, the job is becoming undoable. And since we have gone to this remote learning situation, it has become nearly impossible to do it in the amount of time that a teacher needs to do it. We have people working 16, 18-hour days trying to keep up with their special ed caseloads. We have over 2,300 students identified in Nashua. We don't have enough special educators, in my opinion. I'm all for lower numbers, caps on special education caseloads so we can really get the direct instruction that they need. And I guess my concern, and I've shared this with my administration in Nashua, what are we going to do when our teachers burn out and they go out under FMLA, or they resign, or they just stop coming to work because they can't do it anymore? We have some of the most dedicated teachers in our state. I have watched from Nashua to Manchester to Dover to Hooksett to wherever, and what teachers and support staff have done with very little notice and turnaround time is incredible. I don't know any other industry except maybe the military that could turn around a project like this. But the difference between education and the military is fully funded, and education, in my opinion, is not. We don't have the resources and the infrastructure to do it the way we should be doing it. But if you look, we've made it work. It's far from perfect, and I would say that if you ask a majority of people in this state, they would pay their left arm to go back to the way we had it, having our teachers in front of our kids every day. The support from the state and the federal government in the form of money is great, but we needed it yesterday. And I don't want to sound rude by saying that. I appreciate all the efforts that you and Senator Hassan and the House delegation have done. You've been strong supporters of education and getting funding for us. But this problem for us isn't going away. We're going to be on the front lines with schools that have between 3 and 2,000 students. When you look at our 300 kids in our elementaries and 2,000 in our high schools, how are we keeping all of them safe? Social distancing 6-year-olds in kindergarten is going to be like herding cats. It's going to be a very difficult challenge. And we talk about PPE and all the other things. Where is that coming from? Has anyone tried putting a mask on a 5-year-old? I'm not sure how long that's going to last either. There's just so many challenges we're facing, and I think I will speak for myself and my membership in Nashua. It's becoming overwhelming to the point where we're not sure that we can do it. And of course they're going to do it because that's what teachers do, but this has been a major drain on everyone, and anything that can be done to support our students in the form of technology and access, and our teaching staff in the form of protective equipment and technology, and would be greatly appreciated. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to us today.
Well, thanks very much, Adam. And you raise a whole bunch of good points as well. I'm not going to respond to each of them because I know we've got a number of other people to hear from. But one of clearly the funding piece is something that we need to do at the federal level. And, New Hampshire got $37 million in the CARES package for elementary and secondary schools, and it's supposed to be distributed based on the percentage of Title I students. I don't know if you've started to see any of that money yet. Again, it's my understanding that it has not begun to arrive in the state, so we are going to follow up on that because every little bit is really important for us to get to help you.
Good. Thank you, Adam. Moving on, Mary Kelly, and just a reminder, folks, it's 3:20. We do have a hard stop at 3:45, so if you have a couple quick points you can make, and then we can make sure we get to everyone else on the call, that would be great. Appreciate it. Mary Kelly.
Hi, thank you, and good afternoon, Senator Shaheen and everybody on the call. I'm a faculty member at Franklin Pierce University in Rindge, New Hampshire, and we have a couple of branch campuses as well. So we're, as you might expect, grappling with all of these issues that have been mentioned so far, and we're kind of up against the situation. On the one hand, as we all know, no expert out there thinks we're going to return to any kind of normal situation without a vaccine. But yes, the need for a safe reopening seems to be the objective that certainly on the higher education level, I don't want to use the word consensus, but there's a lot of focus on trying to achieve that outcome. So students can continue their education, parents can go to work, the economy the economic impact can be maximized. So I'll stick to maybe 2 points, and the first is that at my institution, and as I'm aware from, reading the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed, all the various print and online publications, a lot of institutions are grappling with plans, so concrete plans for workable ways to reopen safely, everything from testing, tracking, isolating, trying to harness public health tools, thinking about capacities that need to be put into place for alignment, that kind of keyword there, alignment of strategies and operations and logistics, and all of this needs to happen by individual colleges, and some places have contractual foundations for change, and other places might use Senate-based systems and such. But if I could ask you, Senator, to think about guidelines that could be used in the formulation of these kinds of plans, that would be very useful as we think about returning to some kind of safe reopening. It would be very good to have access as much as possible to to guidelines that could be operated on that could come through via the federal or state level and be kind of processed by individual institutions as would be commensurate with the systems in place there. And the second point is the financials, and as you know, as everybody I think on this call will know, a lot of institutions are heavily revenue dependent and not really well placed to survive enrollment declines, and they're projected at a minimum 10% to through 20-25% for fall, and that's assuming we go to some kind of safe reopening or some kind of on the ground or hybrid kind of plans. So if there could be, Senator Shaheen, if there could be some kind of program of investment similar to the small business relief package, the sum of $50 billion for education, I've seen that mentioned. That would go a long way to enabling and furthering the safe reopening thinking that is being done right now. And also to that point, the issue of a lot of institutions, as you will know, a lot of institutions in New Hampshire have college towns nearby, and a lot of the economic base in those college towns are either indirectly or directly related to the sustainability of the institutions of higher education. So there's a lot of jobs at stake, and particularly in southwestern New Hampshire, where I am. And there are some real challenges there. So if you could bear those points in mind, I think that would be very beneficial for higher education in New Hampshire and for the general economy, as well as the educational needs of all of our students. So thank you. I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. I can tell you that the House bill that has just passed has a $90 billion state fiscal stabilization fund for education, and in addition to that, it has a little over $10 billion for higher education, $7 billion of which is for private nonprofit higher education institutions. So there is some funding there that hopefully can be helpful. In New Hampshire, as a result of the CARES Act, the state's receiving about $41 million for higher education, distributed based on Pell Grant recipient enrollments. So there is money coming in, but it's not enough, as you've identified and as we've heard from teachers on the K through 12 funding.
Thank you. Thank you. That it's good to know about those provisions, but any continuing efforts you can make will be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mary. Folks, I just want to time check. We have 15 minutes. I do have a number of folks to get to, so if you have one point you want to make, I'm sorry we've gotten here, but Carrie Fowler, you are up next.
Hi there, Senator. Thank you for bringing us all together. Carrie Fowler, I'm an elementary teacher and an executive board member for the Rochester Federation of Teachers and Paraprofessionals, and I think I would echo so many of my colleagues' sentiments that have been here today that we need to take a look, especially at the technology piece. I know that was one of our biggest issues. My school district did a great job of parking school buses with Wi-Fi hotspots for people to have access, and that's great short term, but what about long term? That's not feasible long term. And we really need the funding to go one-to-one for kids so that they have these devices available when they need them. I think that, we all know that remote learning is probably not going away, and so what can we do for kids to have them have access to a device that they know how to use, are proficient with using, because they use it both when they're in school and then they can use it at home as well, to try to make this a little more seamless for students. And then just a last point is I do think we need to take a real look at the mental health of not only our students but our teachers. Living in a house of 2 educators and 2 small children, I know that there were days that we were at our wits' end and we're a stable family with income still coming in and food on the table, and I fear for people who don't have that, and how are we going to make sure that mental health is there. To echo Adam from Nashua, I'm afraid we're going to have teachers who are just going to up and quit because they can't do it anymore. So how are we going to retain those teachers and help them and give them the supports they need?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. It's a really important point. I worry about that as well.
Good. Thank you. Jamie, Berlin Middle School.
Yeah, my name is Jamie Welch. I'm the president of the Berlin Education Association. And for us, this is a challenging time, and I'm not going to repeat all the things that we've been hearing about. They're all applicable here. But for us, this crisis started, a year ago or more. We've been a town where state education funding has been a huge problem. We had grassroots efforts going to Concord to try to bring change in that funding. We are on the brink of not existing because of state education funding with low property values. We are at a point where we've closed every school we can, sharing classrooms. And to now jump into remote learning, this is a blow that I'm not certain how well we will survive. We have poured our hearts and souls into making it work, and it's working. All the challenges still exist in Berlin like everywhere else. A couple of different concerns that come across my mind is, we start this effort with grassroots bottom up, but we need top down leadership on this. And when we reach out to our own state, and we're currently working towards funding reform, and that's wonderful, but when we reach out to our own Department of Education, I've been involved with a few different meetings similar to this that have been hosted by our Commissioner of Education, and he's being wooed by these groups like Americans for Prosperity, and he is being asked to put his name out there and put his endorsement out there on how we can use this time of remote learning and transforming our education system to move away from these public schools, to move into different models. My worry is that as we come back into this fall and into the future, we have reduced enrollment. We have families that are uncomfortable sending their kids back into the building and no longer enrolling and decide to homeschool and do anything else. Those enrollment numbers are linked directly to our funding. And if our funding continues to diminish, we're not in a position where we have extra funding. So my concern is that we need some top-down leadership that is going to address all the issues that have been mentioned today, all the concerns with technology, with Wi-Fi, with all of these different, economic concerns and challenges. But we also need to make sure that we have a leadership model within our state that is pro public education. We're at a point right now where I'm not so sure that is where we're headed with our Department of Education.
Thanks a lot, Jamie, for that comment. I can tell you that I am a firm believer in public education. I believe it's the foundation of our democracy in this country, and it's absolutely critical that we continue to provide education for all of the children in this country, in New Hampshire, and that we do everything possible to ensure an equal education for our kids. And I appreciate the comments that have been raised on this call about the disparities that currently exist. And I can tell you, as I'm thinking about what I can do here in Washington to try and help with funding to address those challenges, it's one of the things that is uppermost in my mind, to ensure that we look at how we distribute funding in a way that provides help to those who need it the most.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Jamie. Patrick, next up.
Hi there. Good afternoon. I wanted to first say thank you, Senator, for all you are doing on behalf of our state and our educators. And I will be quick. As a middle school music educator, I am not able to give my students the equal learning opportunities for hands-on learning when I am supposed to be teaching my students all the standards for music education as set by the state and national level. Many of my students do not have access to musical instruments. In fact, many of my students have never held a guitar, ukulele, sat at a piano, or a keyboard. Yes, I can learn the latest technology in Google presentations, virtual meetings, and collaborating in virtual singing lessons, and use these methods to deliver specific standards. However, there are many areas in my subject which cannot be delivered equally to all my students. The arts in general is unique, where it takes specific items to be able to hold, learn, to use, and present with. For the past couple of months, my students have been missing out on the opportunities to play an instrument. The instruments I provide in my classroom are the only instruments many of my students will ever touch. Sitting down and learning to use their fine motor skills, read music, and interpret what the composer or arranger has written teaches my students more than just playing an instrument. It teaches reading, math, history, collaboration, communication, and so on. These are all the basic fundamental skills in life. Remote learning has strengthened my students' technology skills, where I'm seeing some beautiful Google presentations and responses to Google Classroom. I have definitely seen my students grow in this one particular area. However, the creativeness of making music, creating art, and expressing themselves have become very limited due to the resources the students have available to them. The students' needs are not being met, nor we as educators are able to deliver all the needs. I feel the hands-on subjects are getting the short end of the stick here. Educators need funds to supply students with specific items such as access to instruments, even if it's on a rental basis. Access to the basic school supplies is another piece. Our educators have gone above and beyond. Our educators are working around the clock. Many of our students are only able to do their assignments in the evening because they are currently babysitting younger siblings during the traditional school hours. In the end, please know our educators will do whatever they can to support and assist our students.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
I'm like, it's quiet, nothing.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Patrick. Next up, Sue Harden, Pelham Elementary. Sue, do we have you on? Are you on mute, potentially?
My mute off.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I thank you for giving us this opportunity, and I was honored to be asked to be on this call. I want to just turn it a little bit to a little bit of a different perspective. I want to talk about my students. I've taught first grade for 20 years, and I'm now currently in fourth grade for about 5 or 6 years. And their social emotional needs after this are going to be intense. We're seeing students who are going to have to come back to almost a 0.0 of coming back into a classroom, getting along with kids, getting learning to be in a classroom again. And a lot of my colleagues, especially in younger elementary grades, are really concerned with how we're going to get them back in, how we're going to get them if to come in. At least we're hoping to have a little bit of time in the classrooms. If then, God forbid, we have to go out again to remote learning. I give my students sort of a social emotional checklist every day to see how they're coping with this. What I found was that when I ask the questions, I do a live Google Meet every day. My fourth graders are just trying to process what's going on in the world right now. They're hearing things and they're scared. And they're coming to me for the questions. They're not asking me questions about curriculum. They're asking questions about the world. Are we going to be safe? Is my family safe, when my mother goes to work every day? And then, of course, there's the kids who I see who don't have supervision during the day because their parents are working. I have a fourth grader who I think she's alone every single day, waiting for her parent to come home to her.
Wow.
I think that our social emotional learning needs of these children are going to be intense. And if there's money for counselors, social workers especially at this time, I think the schools are going to need that.
Thank you. I certainly agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Did we have Greg Paris on the line? Greg may not have been able to join. Peter Gagnon?
Hi, I'm here. So,
Great.
boy, thank you, Senator, for being here. I'll try to be quick. So,
folks, just remember to mute your line, please, if you're not speaking. Thanks.
So, I had to really agree with all the eloquent statements of my fellow educators and partners. I'm really proud of our students and the communities that really came together to overcome some really significant challenges with a lot of skill and grace and effort. So a lot of these ideas, I think, solving some of the 5G problems, National Highway Act, for 5G would be a fabulous long-term and short-term solution. Certainly from my students, I'm a college educator as well as a high school educator, and what I see is a lot of my upperclassmen, they haven't had the chance to take the SATs, they can't go on college visits, so their world is being turned upside down as well. So I think we're aware of the social emotional cost that everybody, K through 12, is going to be facing, and the idea that we faced it really well, but even the soldier needs to get some support. And I agree that it may not be as sustainable as we would like, but we're aware of that, and I'm confident with better direct leadership at the federal, state, and local levels we can get there. One quick point I would want to make about funding, not so much a money drop. Often throwing money at things, it's great, it's the first step, but I'd rather see the money spent towards sustainable programs, so it's not a one-time thing. Getting everybody computers is great, but what about the training for that?
Right.
So it's the sustainable piece. So it's not only just to help stop this from getting worse, but it can actually be something we can invest in our communities, which is a good investment, I think, for all of us. So to make sure everybody else has a comment, I'll leave that there. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Lisa Stone from Hollis.
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for taking our call today and being such a strong supporter. We really appreciate everything that you're doing in Washington to help support education here in New Hampshire. I know I have exactly 1 minute left on the clock before you have to go, and a lot of things had already been said. There are a couple of quick points that I'd like to add, and we've talked a lot about safety for teachers and their privacy as they're using the technology. But also I'd like to mention the laws that we have, the privacy laws for students here in New Hampshire, and we follow those pretty rigidly. when we're implementing technology within the classroom, but when we're working remotely, those lines become blurred. And I worry a lot about student privacy as well as, our Zooms are getting hacked and kids have technology that they're accessing without a lot of oversight sometimes from home that they would in the classroom, and just having access to content on the technology that they wouldn't when it's structured in a highly structured classroom. So student privacy on the technology. I want to reiterate the trauma and stress, not only of the students and addressing that going forward, helping kids overcome. As we know, brain research shows us that they don't retain information when they're faced with trauma, and that's what we've been faced with now and going forward. We have teachers that are facing mental fatigue and worry as well. We're pushing through every day without being able to take a real sick day, personal health day, while our family members are getting sick with COVID and you're worrying, but there's no subs, especially for those case managers and special ed teachers who are held to the laws regarding services that they provide. And so if they are out of the classroom, then they have to make up those hours, pushing way beyond a traditional day for regular classroom teachers, and just adding to that incredible amount of work on their plate. And I know I'm out of time, but I wanted to say that special ed, as it's been talked about over and over again, is the real focus and struggle as we're providing these services for kids, and that the paras are, yes, they're going in and doing the battle for the teachers, providing that one-on-one. Technology isn't the best mode of transmission in a lot of these cases for elementary kids, and they're going in and providing that one-on-one service to help these kids have that equal access. And I worry about funding going forward to fund all of those positions, because they're just as important as the teachers in the classroom and the partnership to provide that individual education. So
yes,
I tried to beat
I agree,
that.
Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sarah, I've got a few more minutes, so I would like to hear from Kim and Alex, who I think still we haven't heard from yet.
Definitely. Kim, you're up.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to add to what my colleagues from across the state have already said. I think I can just bring a the perspective of rural New Hampshire. Madison is a small town, and I live in Sandwich. I have a daughter who is a third grader and going through remote learning with that school district. So I think one of the biggest problems that we face is just the inequalities, whether it be from instruction, kids accessing instruction. You have families who are offering lots of support with older siblings or parents. And then you have families who have, the child is 6, 7, and 8 years old. I'm a first and second grade teacher, and these kids are trying to navigate their remote learning and the technology piece all on their own.
Right.
So there's huge inequalities there, and I'm not really sure how in the classroom teachers were able to level that playing field. But how do we do that remotely? I'm not really sure we can. So I know that's something that's very scary for us. Technology, certainly in rural New Hampshire, having internet access. I mean, I myself live in a place where HughesNet is my only option, and I've had to add that to my home to try to, manage myself being on the internet all the time and my daughter. So that's been another tricky piece. And luckily, other companies came through. But like we said, is that sustainable? And there's some of us in rural New Hampshire that's not an option. So I think the biggest problem we're facing is just the inequalities across all boards, from instruction to grading to technology and access. So, like I said, I'm not sure there's an answer for that. Certainly more funding and additional staffing would certainly help, but, long-term sustainable, we're not sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks. You point out two really big challenges.
Thank you, Kim. And lastly, we have Alex from Hillsborough Deering.
The enviable position of going last, right? Thank you again for this opportunity to have a conversation. I was just hoping, to kind of close the conversation, if there's anything that you could do to push back on that narrative that this is the opportunity to establish a pilot for a new normal in education. I think you can kind of gauge from this conversation that there's a lot broken with what's going on. For sure, there's been some successes throughout the state as We as educators have been triaging and MacGyvering our lesson plans, doing the best we can for our students. But this is not a format that really works for a majority of our students. It doesn't work for all of our content areas. It doesn't work for all of our learners. There's only really a small slice of our learners where it is working 100% for. A lot of times we're losing at least a half, if not two-thirds, of our instructional time with our students. And we know that the research shows that the most important factor in a kid's success is that relationship with their teacher. And really that's what they've lost. And that's what I think a lot of my members are experiencing, is just the immense loss right now of all of that time in their educational experiences. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. Some of you may know I started out my first job was as a teacher, and I appreciate the critical importance of the teacher in the classroom. As I said, I believe that public education is fundamental to our democracy in this country, and I believe that teachers are the ones who help students learn. And while, as you point out, remote learning works in some occasions and for some things, without the teacher to provide that assistance in the classroom, it just, for so many kids, it just doesn't work. So I am a believer in that. I will do everything I can to support the work that you all are doing and to see how we can support that in Washington as we look at providing additional help in the next package to address the pandemic that we're facing. So thank you all so much for being willing to share with me this afternoon and for everything you're doing on the front lines to try and address the needs of our young people. I remember when I was governor and we were working to try and expand public kindergarten. One of the important points that someone gave to me is they said, students may only be 20% of our population, but they are 100% of our future. And we need to remember that. And the better the opportunities for our kids, the better the opportunities for all of us, for our state, for our country. So again, thank you all so much. And I hope you will stay in touch with us. I'm sure many of you know Erica and, of course, Sarah and Madison, who are on this call. Share with us if there are particular aspects of what you're hearing that we're working on in Washington that you have concerns about, or if you have ideas for things that we ought to be looking at. I hope you'll share those with us.
Good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.